Hello, YouTube, and welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. I have 3 articles in this episode for you. All 3 articles are in the description, have their URLs listed there for your convenience. You want to do any more research or anything on these? First one here is off of Natural News, and it says, is forced vaccination on the horizon in the medical police state known as California? Great state of California is facing another serious threat to health freedom from vaccine pimp Senator Richard Pan, who is right now pushing a new piece of legislation he claims to have authored that has the potential to make vaccines a mandatory medical procedure for all children in the Golden State, this time with no exceptions or opt-out protections whatsoever. A recent action alert issued by the Alliance for Natural Health, USA, warns that Senator Pan's so-called Children's Bill of Rights is anything but what its name implies. When taken to its logical end, it has the power to force all parents in California to vaccinate their children based on the premise that if they do not, they are somehow depriving their children of state-ordered rights to medical care. The egregious bill, which Senator Pan introduced back in December, has all the outward appearances of being a move in the interest of children's health. It claims to provision that all children will have access to quality health care, child care, and education because of it, at the same time declaring that these benefits are inherent rights that should be afforded to every single child throughout the state. But upon closer analysis, the legislation is actually a Trojan horse bill that deceptively withdraws parental rights from the healthcare equation, allowing the state to decide the healthcare needs of children. If the state should decide, for instance, that the vaccines are 100% safe and effective, then it suffices that the state could then declare that any child who is unvaccinated is being deprived of his or her rights to health care. If a child has a right to basic medical care, this should very well, or could very well, be interpreted to include vaccinations, warns ANH USA about Senator Pan's legislation. If the parents of a homeschooled child decide to delay vaccinations or skip certain shots, the state could argue that the parents are withholding necessary medical treatment and force vaccination on the child. As to what the state could then do in response to parents who refuse mandate, ANH USA adds that such an offense could be interpreted by the courts as being grounds for removing the child from the custody of the parents and turning him or her over to the state. Senator Pan is a vaccine tyrant who must be stopped. These are the frightening prospects, but they represent the mindset of medical tyrannists like Senator Richard Pan, who Natural News earlier exposed as being a little more than a big pharma hack, who routinely accepts cash bribes from the vaccine industry. This evil sellout has proven that he will stop at nothing to see all children vaccinated, even against the will of the parents. While Senator Pan's commitment to imposing a vaccine dictatorship has thus far moved forward with few hiccups, this latest stunt could become his undoing. Not only is it a threat to California parents who do not want to vaccinate their children, but it's also a threat to the rest of the country, which often follows in the footsteps of California when it comes to making policy. The zeal of Senator Pan to impose a vaccine regime on unwilling Californians must be checked, says ANH USA, calling on all of its members to take up the fight against vaccine tyranny while we still have the freedom to do so without penalty. It is shameful and ironic to use a children's Bill of Rights as a vehicle to stamp out the last remaining rights of parents to refuse vaccination for children. What else will the California government determine is best for children, whether parents agree or not? This is an incredibly slippery slope. The next article that I have is also off of Natural News. It says, chemical-ridden GMO foods are now being pushed on Africans, destroying their natural food culture. In response to a propaganda piece recently published in a local newspaper that pushes the human papillomavirus, or HPV, vaccine as a viable remedy to address exploding cancer rates throughout the developing Africa, a concerned citizen of Rwanda wrote a letter to the editor countering this narrative, pointing out that toxic food and not a lack of vaccines is why many Africans are now suffering. The original article, written by a board member of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, a public-private partnership of the World Health Organization, otherwise known as WHO, and various countries throughout the world that together aggressively push vaccines as the solution to just about everything, contends that a major contributor to escalating rates of cancer throughout the world is a lack of HPV vaccines. In other words, it is an obvious endorsement and marketing puff piece to sell more vaccines rather than address the root causes of the problem. One of these root causes, says Mwine Kalinda, who wrote a letter to the editor in response to this shameless HPV vaccine push piece, is toxic foods grown with biotechnology and harsh chemical pesticides, which much of natural food that Africans have relied on for millennia, Kalinda correctly points out, are being actively replaced by imitator fake foods that are most certainly contributing to not only cancer, but a host of other chronic health conditions, including diabetes and high blood pressure. We are what we eat, and we are moving away from our traditional foods to what we think, wrongly, are more desirable Western ones, but whose true agenda consequences we will only realize when it's already too late, Kalinda writes in outrage. Remember Obama's evergreen revolution? This is what's driving higher rates of cancer in Africa. In the original article by Dr. Josie Onkojo Awilia, and I'm guessing at the pronunciation on that, who is listed as former finance minister of Nigeria. The claim is made that because people are living longer in Africa and many other places throughout the developing world, that cancer is simply an inevitable result of this. No mention is made of any potential contributing factors such as toxic agriculture, which is widely known to be a growing issue throughout Africa. During President Obama's first term, there was a major push to transform African agriculture away from traditional organic methods, much like what's happened in India during the mid-20th century. Promises of higher yields and more income, the dangling carrot of enticement for anyone in the developing world, were tied to the adoption of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, and chemical crop technologies. Recognizing this was taking place more than 7 years ago, it became clear that all of the progress that has since taken place towards this end has led to some drastic changes in the way African food is grown, and consequently, the health of Africans has been on a noticeably steady decline ever since. While there are contributing factors to cancer besides crop chemicals and fake GMO food, these are major things that directly correlate with the escalating rates of cancer, for which Dr. Onakoja Iwilia, I don't know how to pronounce his name, writes, but sadly, he makes no mention whatsoever of them, instead claiming that Africans simply need more vaccines, which represents yet another source of cancer-causing toxins. It's really clear, or I'm sorry, it's really critical that we apply the precautionary principle fully while considering wider public adoption of insufficiently tested products, urges Kalinda in his response letter. Public health is more important than rapid introduction of technologies whose long-term effects have not been reliably determined by non-industry influenced research. And the final article I have in this episode is off of Gizmodo, and it says, excessive radiation inside Fukushima fries cleanup robot. Controlled robot sent to inspect and clean damaged reactor at Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant had to be pulled early when its onboard camera went dark. the result of excess radiation. The abbreviated mission suggests that radiation levels inside the reactor are even higher than was reported last week, and that robots are going to have a hell of a time cleaning this mess up. Last week, Gizmodo reported that radiation levels inside the containment vessel of Reactor 2 at Fukushima reached a jaw-dropping 530 sieverts per hour, a level high enough to kill a human within seconds. Some Japanese government officials questioned the reading because Tokyo Electric Power Company Holding, or TEPCO, calculated it by looking at camera interference on the robot sent in to investigate, rather than measuring it directly with a Geiger counter or dosimeter. It now appears that this initial estimate may have been too low. Either that or TEPCO's robot is getting closer to the melted fuel, which is very likely. High radiation readings near any of the used fuel to be expected. That same remotely operated robot had to be pulled when its camera began to fail after just 2 hours of exposure to the radiation inside the damaged reactor. Accordingly, TEPCO has revised its estimate 50 sieverts per hour, which is 120 more sieverts than what was calculated late last month, although the new estimate comes with a 30% margin of error. The robot is designed to withstand about 1,000 accumulated sieverts, which, given the failure after 2 hours, jibes well with the camera interference. This likely means that the melted fuel burned through its pressure vessel during the meltdown in March of 2011 and is sitting somewhere nearby. It is important to point out it is contained within the plant and is not affecting regions nearby. There are no new leaks from the facility, leaking into the air or sea. Also, the radiation levels inside the plant are not increasing. The levels are getting higher because TEPCO is getting closer to the source of the radiation, namely the melted fuel. The previous upper reading of 73 sieverts was in 2012 from a much greater distance. Yesterday, TEPCO sent the robot into reactor number 2 to do some exploratory work and to prepare the site for future investigation. It was the first time that the robot had entered the reactor since the earthquake and tsunami disaster 6 years ago. The robot was supposed to clean a thick layer of grime, thought to be melted bits of paint and cable insulation, under the pressure vessel, which holds the reactor core. The company is trying to clean the passage before another robot is sent in to conduct a more thorough investigation. A second robot, dubbed the Scorpion, is scheduled to measure radiation and temperature inside the reactor and to assess the condition of the reactor and the melted fuel. Before that can happen, the passageway needs to be cleared. TEPCO's cleanup robot, equipped with a high-pressure water pump and scraper, only went partway into the area underneath the core that TEPCO wants to inspect. The probe was able to clean a few feet of the burnt residue near the exterior of the primary containment vessel, but wasn't able to clean more because the deposits were too tough to remove. The burnt dark brown gunk grew thicker and was harder to remove as the robot went further. After 2 hours, the robot's video feed dimmed dramatically, indicating an imminent failure. Its operators aborted the mission before losing complete control of the probe. TEPCO is now worried that the Scorpion robot will not be able to reach the space beneath the pressure vessel and, like its predecessor, will not be able to work for very long in the damaged plant designed to handle 1,000 total sieverts. The high level of radiation may force TEPCO, a nationally owned company, to rethink its robot-based strategy for locating molten fuel. It is currently in the early stages of cleanup that's expected to last decades. Until TEPCO knows the precise location of the melted fuel and until it's able to ascertain the structural damage in each of the 3 reactors affected, the company won't be able to decommission the plant and remove the fuel. So there you have that article. There's a lot of comments on this one if you want to pull it up and read those for yourself. The URL's in the description of the video for your convenience. If you like what I'm doing here, give this a thumbs up, share it on your social media so everybody gets to. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you might try that. That way you'll stay informed. I'll see you in the next episode.